Hello, and welcome in. Let's talk music. Specifically, this new album from King Gizzard, Alien Metal. That's right, another bald white dude who can review some King Gizzard music. I haven't watched too much of the Fantano review, so hopefully my comments don't overlap with his and this is a unique viewing experience for you. King Gizzard has been my favorite band since about early 2020, when the COVID lockdown went into effect. It gave me a lot of time to listen to their 15 albums or so that were already released at the time. And now we're all the way up to 28, I believe. I lost count after about 20. Similar to Ween, King Gizzard is constantly experimenting with different genres. But differently than Ween, I feel like King Gizzard steps into a genre and makes it their own aesthetic. For example, Hell, the song that ends Infest the Rat's Nest, is an insane, hardcore thrash metal song, but I can't picture anybody other than King Gizzard making that song. There's just such a unique sound to every genre and every song they've approached, and it's why King Gizzard has a special place in my heart. And on this new album, Alien Metal, we see King Gizzard returning to a sound that they have done before, most notably on the Silver Chord. But even earlier than the Silver Chord, King Gizzard had been experimenting with electronic dance music on songs like Intrasport, as well as their 30-minute instrumental album, Made in Timeland. And I think we could go even earlier than that and say they had experimented with electronic trance music at the end of Acarine off of Fishing for Fishies. And it would be silly not to mention, but Joey Walker has his own side project where he makes exclusively electronic music under the name Bullant. And now here we are at Alien Metal, where we see them combining multiple different electronic music genres such as trance music, house music, even some IDM. And I feel as though they've almost perfected that techno and electronic sound. Keyword, almost. I think that the mastering has grown a lot since Silver Chord. You can really tell that they've honed in and focused on how to properly mix an electronic song. However, I do feel that there's still some shortfalls. I think that the drums get muddied throughout the mix in a lot of these songs, and I'd like to hear a little bit more attention to the kick drums. And that's really my only overall complaint of the album. Aside from that, everything is sounding amazing. Another thing that King Gizzard has experimented with in the past was an endlessly looping album. They did this with Nonagon Infinity, and we can actually see that happening here on this new album. By the time the last song finishes, it starts the sound of almost being warped back into time and sends you back to the beginning like you're stepping into a time warp. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get into the track list, starting with Sapiens. And this song instantly tells you what kind of a record you're about to get into with these hard, four on the floor hits echoing in your eardrum, as well as these hi-hats hitting on the upbeats and this hypnotic tom drum pattern. And this song really makes use of its lack of synths with a lot of drum layering, including one of my favorite and most iconic drum sounds in the world, a 909 cymbal. I'll play a sample of that right here. And although there is minimal synths on this song, the ones that we do have do a great job of driving the foundation of the song and allowing some space for these more ambient noises that start to hit throughout the song, including this really weird vocal sample of someone saying Palantir. And it really tripped me out the first listen. I was like, who's here? Who is that? Who's in my house? I'd say one of the highlights of the song is the last drop when there's about a minute and a half left. We get these really awesome, I believe they're saw lead synths, and they're just so energetic, and they remind me of a lot of earlier electronic work, something that you would hear in maybe the early 2000s or the late 90s. And then this track transitions into our next one, Alien Metal, which I already made a short video about, so I'll try to keep it brief. And on this song is when we can really start to notice that the drums are getting a little bit muddied in the mix. I think that they should be a little bit louder, and they're becoming kind of forgotten about once more synths get added onto the mix. But aside from that, I've fallen more and more in love with this song with every listen I've given to it, and it reminds me a lot of the last Molchat Doma. I think I said that right, the last Molchat Doma record. It reminds me of my favorite parts in that, with this dark, electronic, almost disco like song. On the song, there's a lot of ambience added by these synths that seem to only happen maybe once or a few times, or maybe even the pew pew that happens throughout the song. And it adds a really nice, eerie feeling that sticks with you. Despite being 5 minutes, the song does a really good job at keeping you interested throughout, with these vocoder vocals that sound truly amazing, and this intense instrumental that just gets more and more aggressive, especially once you hit the halfway point of the song, and it just keeps on building up until eventually fading into our next song, Superheavy Supercritical. And this is another mostly instrumental song, aside from this great vocal chop about feeling super heavy and super critical. This song instantly starts out with this hypnotic house beat, which you can't help but bob your head to, eventually taking us into this really beautiful and ambient and melodic portion where the vocoder vocals, or the vocal chops, are getting higher in pitch and actually creating a melody. And that melodic portion ends up turning into a build up for a drop that takes us straight into this trance inspired beat with these four on the floor kicks, but this polyrhythmic synth at about, I want to say, like a 6/8 time signature. I could be wrong about that. And King Gizzard does a great job at adding more and more layers onto this polyrhythmic synth loop. One of my favorite things that they add ends up being just a very minimalistic clap used as a snare. This is just such a fun song, and it really showcases how good King Gizzard has gotten at making electronic music, to the point where if I heard this on a house music playlist, I don't think that I'd be able to tell it was King Gizzard if I hadn't listened to the new record. And then we get to Kill for the Steel, which is another song that I made a short video about, and my opinions have changed entirely surrounding this song. When this song released, it was my least favorite of the three singles, and now it's probably my second favorite song on the album. When I made my short video, I said that I believed there was something missing from the track, like we weren't getting enough drums in the first half, or we weren't getting enough synths in the second half. But overall, the minimalism for the song is actually working in its favor. I don't know what I was talking about when I said that. Another complaint I had was the lyricism being boring, which is still the same complaint I have now. It's the only thing that brings this song down, in my opinion. But I love those vocoder vocals still. I think they sound really good on this song, actually. I'm a huge fan of the first drop with this hypnotic looping synth sample, I believe, and these layered, heavy sub-bass drums. And never did I think I'd be saying this about a King Gizzard song, but the sub-bass is absolutely speaker shaking and hardcore. They then go on to layer some snare drums over top of every kick hit, adding a lot more intensity to this already intense and hypnotic loop. And with the second drop of this song, aka the drums only portion of the song, you can really hear a lot of that IDM influence with these really echoed and reverberated and stuttering drums reminiscent of Aphex Twin in a way. And then we get to the fifth track, which is, ironically, Level 5, which was the first single to release on this album and instantly sinked its claws into me, hooking me into what was to come from this album. And I think this song probably has the best mastered drums on the album, in my opinion. It is the one song that isn't suffering from the drums getting super muddied in the mix. And speaking of the drums, I'm really enjoying the breakbeat style of playing behind this drum loop, I think it's one of my favorite drum styles in electronic music. And these drums build such a perfect foundation for the synths that go over top of them. Most of those synths being a bit simple and repetitive, but I think that's actually perfect when you have such a complex drum pattern just banging in your eardrum. It's not that the synths are simple, it's just that they aren't overly complex, which I think is perfect because if they were a bit more complex, I think they would actually distract from the hardcore breakbeat drums. I'm a huge fan of the hook of this song with this catchy repetition of "We're on level 5," as well as the echoed and harmonious pad synths that go underneath those vocals. One of my favorite easy to miss moments is when you're about 4 minutes into the song and it quiets down in the transitionary period. There's what sounds like a backing vocal that was left into the mix, I think intentionally, but it also could be a synth. But regardless, it's humming the melody that will finish out the song. This is by far my favorite song on the album. It's so fun, so high energy, and we start to calm down a bit in the next song, Rapid Alpha Decay. And this is definitely the most chill song on the album, starting out with these beautiful pad synths. I'm once again a huge fan of the vocoder vocals that we get. This time it sounds like they're almost being run through an organ synth. I'm also a huge fan of the synth strings we get once the hypnotic kick and drums start coming in. And then we also get into this really interesting and echoed and reverberated drop. The way that the main synth is echoing with this boom, 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 pew, 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 almost reminds me of this like metallic wave. And this isn't the only synth with a strong echo effect. We get many throughout this song that have such a strong echo and reverberated effect, and it makes you almost sound as if you're falling backwards into a portal. Overall, as much as I like this song, it is probably my least favorite on the album, unfortunately. That being because I love the higher energy tracks, such as our next one, UQT. And no, I'm referencing the name of the song, not you. Although two things can definitely be true. UQT is definitely the most catchy song on this album. I have not been able to stop singing the hook with this "Give me some of that UQT." Although I'd like them louder, I'm a huge fan of the drums throughout this song, especially these little electronic bongo patterns that are just tickling your brain at certain portions of the song. I don't know why I was dancing. You can't even hear it. I hear it in my head, so I'm like, yeah. Something making this song stick out from the rest is definitely the inclusion of the electric guitar. It is the only song on the album to feature an electric guitar, and it was worth it when we're getting these hardcore muted power chord strums that just guide the entire song. This is another song that has a lot of beauty hidden in the overall ambience of the song. However, with how loud some of the synths are and how loud the electric guitar is throughout the song, I feel like some of that goes overlooked. This song is probably my third favorite on the album, but I feel like if they gave a little bit more attention to the drums in the mix, it would have easily been my second or even my first favorite. But aside from that, this song is still fun, hypnotic, and catchy. And then we get to Atomic Collapse, which is unfortunately the last song on this album. Kind of. On the song, we get a nice and slow build up, starting out with these kick drums and this bass loop that gradually adds more IDM influenced drums over top of it. And this song itself is more of a trance inspired or maybe a IDM inspired song compared to some of the club and house bangers we've gotten to this point on this album. One thing I wanted to mention is these bit crushed snares that get added into the mix at about a minute 45 in, because I think that they were a huge risk to take. Oftentimes, bit crushed drums just sound very much so like video games and kind of tacky. But over this instrumental, I feel like they're working really well and adding to the hypnotic flow of the song. Once you get to the second half of the song, it starts divulging into a little bit of this controlled chaos with these beautiful echoed synths that are just mesmerizing. The song does a really great job at painting this feeling of living in a psychedelic dystopian era and in a way it reminds me of the electronic version of Murder of the Universe. And then the song ends with what sounds like you're falling backwards into a time warp, perfectly looping you back into the first song where you started to do this all over again. Overall, there is a lot to love about this album. King Gizzard is doing a great job with the knob twisting, adding this psychedelic effect. The vocoder vocals were an amazing idea. All of the vocoder vocals on this album are adding to the hypnotism of it. Maybe I'm a bit biased because I've always been a huge fan of vocoder and talkbox vocals, but I'd like to hear what you guys thought, so be sure to leave your comments. From what I've seen in the King Gizzard community, there is a bit of a divide when it comes to the electronic step that King Gizzard has been taking with the electronic albums and the electronic rave-influenced live performances. But I am confident enough to say that I am loving this step. And with how good their electronic mastering has gotten, I'm excited to see more of a step in this direction, and I hope that they do another electronic album. Once the hype of this album settles, I'm sure that I will put it at about a halfway point in terms of my least to most favorite King Gizzard records. Who knows, maybe in the future I'll do a King Gizzard album tier list video and briefly explain why I'm placing the albums where I am. But anyways, let's close this out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this album, why don't you go on and check out my music? Not much electronic over there, but there's some. Be sure to like and subscribe for more music-related content. Here's where you can subscribe. Here's some videos you can watch. Thanks for signing in to Pyramidian. Pyramidian signing out.